Welcome to a new edition of the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino. On this episode, we talk with lawyer and author of Racing Against Time, Jeffrey Weiss. As the author of Racing Against Time, a fitness and personal transformation memoir, he tells of his midlife adventures in extreme sports, including finishes at Ironman Arizona and the 72-mile Ultramarathon Midnight Express between the ages of 57 and 61. These were the culmination of a fitness journey that began with his first 10K at the age of 48. Jeff's story demonstrates the possibility of radical, life-altering change even during late middle age. By day, he is a lawyer in Israel, and he has a fascinating story of evolution and awakening. It's quite an adventure.
Well, hey, man, it's great to meet you. I love your story. Thank you so much for taking a minute out today.
Of course. It's my pleasure.
So where are you located on the planet?
In Tel Aviv, Israel, of all places.
Oh, wow. Okay. Excellent. Well, we'll peel back all of those layers. But to begin with, I want to know first and foremost, 5 years ago, this pandemic changed the world and changed all of our lives. How much of living through that time period has affected the way that you live life now? And how did you get through that pandemic era?
It's funny. In some ways, I think the fitness stuff really helped me get through it. I trained throughout the pandemic. I had to make some adjustments because gyms closed, pools closed, but continued to run outside, bought a nice spin bike, and used that throughout the pandemic. I actually ran in the Los Angeles Marathon on March 8th of 2020. It was the last big city marathon in the world before the COVID lockdowns, and then started to do races again in, I think, the summer of 2021. So I think fitness was very much, for me, a constant throughout COVID. I guess in many ways, it didn't affect me as badly as I had feared that it might, because I did have other things going on in my life that kept me very busy and focused.
So before we get into this ultimate transformation you've gone through in your life, I want to begin with this. If I put you in front of a bunch of 12-year-olds at career day, and one of the kids in the back of the room wanted to get to the heart and soul of what you do for a living, how would you answer that child?
Well, the fitness stuff is certainly not my profession. I've written about my journey, but I work. I'm a patent lawyer. I work in-house for a company. I work on policy issues, regulatory issues, having candidly nothing to do with the world of fitness. And so for me, the fitness is very much, it's another aspect of my life that I really, really enjoy, and that means a lot to me. But it's not my main career and not my main career focus.
So when you were a kid, when you were 12 years old, what was your dream job? What did you want to be when you grew up?
I probably had a mix of the classic childhood dreams of being a professional baseball player or something like that. But at the same time, both my parents were lawyers, and I think it was set in my mind at an early age that I would one day be a lawyer too, and that, in fact, is what I became. And I was a lawyer in private practice for 25 years before I went in-house.
So tell me where you were born and raised, and what were some of the foundational seeds that were planted in you early on that you think eventually kind of flowered into your focus on transforming your life and health and fitness?
I was born in New York, raised for the most part in Poughkeepsie, New York, until I was about 12. And then my family moved out to Arizona. My dad was always into sport. He was a tennis player, and he got all of us into sport. And we played baseball, we played tennis, and mostly stuck with tennis. And I think he really got me to appreciate how important it was to have regular sport, regular fitness in your life. And so I played tennis in college at a Division III school. And then after my tennis days were over, looked hard for another sport because I always wanted to have physical activity in my life, and got into weightlifting, powerlifting, and did that for a bunch of years before I got into endurance sports. But so that was always very central to my thinking, and I really did get that from my father. And then, of course, my parents, as lawyers, they were big on education, and I really did have a love of school, and went through college, got a law degree, and then actually got 2 master's degrees after that, which I think helped kind of round me out professionally in a variety of different ways. So definitely my parents were huge influences on how I ultimately developed.
So before we get into racing against time, talk to me a little bit about this geographical evolution to Israel today. Kind of talk to me a little bit about, coming from America to Israel and how that's influenced the way that you live your life today.
Well, it's funny. I think, you had asked earlier about COVID and its impact on my life. And actually, I in some ways, trace a bit of my decision to come to Israel now to COVID, in the sense that with COVID and my company, like a lot of companies, became one in which you could work from anywhere, it caused me to realize that I could basically live anywhere in the world that I wanted to live. And I had lived in Israel for 2 years in the 1980s as a student. Actually did my first year of law school here in Israel in Hebrew. And after finishing that year, passing my classes, I decided to finish law school in the States and kind of promised myself I would one day come back to live, but deferred it, and got married, had children, and sort of life kind of took over. And then a few years ago realized that, perhaps now is the time to do that. And so moved here shortly before my 60th birthday. And it has been, obviously with the wars that have been happening since 2023, it's been a very eventful time here, but also I think quite a meaningful time.
So talk to me about this transformation. Was there a flashpoint? Was there kind of a culmination of things that led to kind of this renewed focus on fitness? How did that happen?
There kind of was a flashpoint, I think. When I was 48, my father had passed away, and I was helping my mother downsize. And so we, together with one of my brothers and nephew, we were basically taking furniture, moving it out of the house into storage or to Goodwill. And it was a pretty intense day, lots of effort in moving all of that heavy stuff. And I was able to keep up with 2 much younger people, but oddly, I guess it struck me as I enjoyed the activity. I realized I could still keep up, but I also kind of intuitively knew that if I didn't start to get more serious about fitness, I would start to lose what I had. And so kind of resolved that, I think a lot of us kind of think that we can take fitness, whatever, nutrition, sleep, exercise, we can take those things more seriously when we have more time down the road. And I kind of realized I'm 48, like there's no more deferring this. This is the time to get started. And so shortly after that, I took a running class that had the goal of getting us ready for a 10-kilometer race. I did that and kind of got bitten by the bug, and then just started pushing to progressively challenge myself more and more with longer distances, harder races, got at the triathlon, and kind of climbed the ladder both with running and with triathlon as well. And it's been at this point about a 15-year journey, and it's been quite rewarding for me.
My dad passed away at 64. He had a litany of things that he was a native New Yorker, and he had a litany of things that were kind of against him with diabetes and heart and weight issues. And I remember kind of hitting that same bridge myself. I remember seeing him towards the end, and I was like, there's a part of your life that you can kind of catch up to, dreams and certain things, but there's something about your physical body that you're not going to be able to kind of go back and say, I wish I would have done it differently. And I remember at that point, I really had an epiphany and just thought about things I was eating and what I was doing and physical activity. And I think those are definitely crossroads that you get to in your life. But do you think back at any regularity and think what kind of a gift that was, that you had that moment of realizing that you could do that and you have this whole different perspective on life now?
Absolutely. I think you put it beautifully. And I think those things were going on in my life as well. My father-in-law passed away at 67. My dad was 75. In today's terms, I think both are, really are way too young, and kind of realizing that we can't take our health for granted. And obviously there are things that are beyond our control, but I think a lot is within our control. And at some point we stop getting second chances. I think we can neglect our health and our fitness for quite a long time, but at some point it really does become problematic to defer any longer. And so, I think for me in my late 40s, I think I felt like I did catch it in time and got myself out of the malaise that I was essentially in with respect to my health and well-being. And it made for a really wonderful decade of my 50s.
So let me ask you this: what was the first marathon like? Like when you really, when you hit that point and you finally decided to do it. That's a long race. And I ask that because I was a runner in high school, and I remember all of the endorphins. I remember that feeling. But when you're running 26 miles, it's a different kind of a thing. What was that like?
It was amazing in the sense that it was a journey. It was like life in a day, or in my case, life in a little over 5 hours, where, you start the race and it's so exciting. It was the Marine Corps Marathon, so it's a huge race, and they have great kind of traditions. They fire a howitzer to start it. They had a flyover by, I think, Osprey, a couple of Osprey planes, which are quite amazing to see close up. Huge crowd, lots of people lining the sidewalks, and so exciting to start it. And, after about, 5, 6, 8 miles, you start to feel some fatigue. And so you just go through this whole process of, you have some ups, you have some downs. It was quite scenic, but there were some quiet points in the race. Haynes Point in particular, it's a park area where there were very few people watching there. And, that was a bit of a low point. But it was just amazing. And then to hit 18 miles, 20 miles, and people talk about hitting the wall at a marathon, which I really worried about at the time, because I had recovered from an injury and hadn't been able to run farther than 15 miles in training. But to cover those last miles, I had once told a friend years earlier that I was as likely to run a marathon as I was to walk on the moon. And so to get there, to get to that finish line, in the Marine Corps, it's an incredible finish. You finish at the Iwo Jima Memorial, and a Marine second lieutenant actually salutes you and puts the medal over your neck. So you really get this incredible surge of wonderful feelings when you're done. And for me, it was amazing, and it was an experience I realized that I wanted to have, kind of again and again.
So who's been kind of your inspirational force in your life? Who's been a hero?
I think, in terms of folks who, whose books I've read, and I do read a lot in this space, and it really helped me along the way. I love David Goggins. I've read both of his books. I follow him on Instagram. I just think he's amazing. I think he's not just physically inspiring in terms of the things that he does, but I actually think there's incredible emotional depth to his writing and to his understanding of kind of what motivates us, what inspires us, and how to really, get ourselves to go out there and take on difficult challenges. Dean Karnazes is a very famous ultramarathoner. He wrote a terrific book about his adventures in marathons and ultramarathons, which I really, really loved. Travis Macy is another ultramarathoner, great guy. I find reading those kinds of books to be really inspiring. The kinds of things that people are capable of doing is just extraordinary, and it starts to make you feel like things that you once thought were impossible are maybe not so crazy. And that certainly is what Ironman became to me. I would have, even after I had become a marathoner, even after I'd done my first ultramarathon, I never thought I could do a full Ironman. But then over time, just, having been inspired by so many folks who had done incredible things, decided, what, this is a challenge that I should take on, and it'll be a good experience for me. And in the end, it was magnificent.
So when you write a book, you're obviously putting your story out there, and you're the one that knows it best. But during a process of creating something like that, you're bound to discover something that you didn't know, something that was unexpected. What did you learn about yourself and your journey and your life while writing this book that you didn't expect or you didn't realize until you started this process?
That's a great question. It's a bit trite, but people talk about the joy being in the journey rather than the destination. And I did feel like there was a lot of truth to that. In other words, even races, there were two ultramarathons. It was the same ultramarathon that I tried twice, the Comrades Marathon in South Africa. It's a 56-mile race. And I got cut both times, the first time at a checkpoint after 50 miles and 11 hours of running, and the second time after 35 miles and about 7 or 8 hours of running. But those were great experiences for me. And especially the first one, that actually was what propelled me toward Ironman. And so I think that there is a way to integrate, I think being willing to fail, I think taking on risks where the outcome is not certain, there's a lot of growth in that. That was not something I expected at the beginning. I think at the beginning of my journey, I figured that whatever challenge I took on, if I did the work, did the preparation, did the training, it would all end in a good way with a finish and a medal and a big smile. And what I learned was that it doesn't always work out that way, but that's good too. That's part of the journey. And I think it's a good skill to be willing to fail because, in so many spheres of our life, we can't be certain of outcome, but we can be certain of our effort. We can be certain of our commitment, and we can really, do everything in our power to try to enjoy the journey while we're having it.
So what motivates you to get up every day? What is your motivation to not only do the work that you do in law, but to keep yourself physically fit, to continue to run races, and to push yourself to be healthy? What is that every day for you?
I think part of it, honestly, is thinking, and this may sound odd, because I've talked so much about preparing for these races well in advance, but I think a lot of short-term thinking actually is a good thing in the sense that, we hear a lot these days about longevity and health span. Longevity, basically how many years we can potentially live, and health span, how many of those years can we be essentially healthy, active, and free of major disease. And I think with respect to longevity, candidly, I just feel like that's not something I'm going to spend any time worrying about. I think it's going to depend on a lot of factors. A great many of them are beyond my control, but I'm super focused on health span. And I've seen the change in my life since I started to get in shape and since I started to really get serious about my fitness. It's just made life better for me. I love being active. I love being, feeling good about my body. I love being strong. I love being able to do the things that I want to do. And that's what keeps me going. Like, I want to live life this way for as long as I can, through my 60s, into my 70s, into my 80s. And I know that it's not something that I can just assume will happen on its own. It's something that I need to make happen. And so for me, I use the races as motivation to stay focused on my training and to push myself. But at the end of the day, I think it's about trying to, and again, it sounds like a cliche, but really to live, my best life, my most active, most balanced life. And that's what keeps me going.
I remember this has been about 4 years ago, I went to Manitou Springs, and they have an incline, and my stepdaughter really wanted to go up there, and I was with a group of people, and there was no way anybody was going to be able to do it. And I was like, yeah, let's do it. And it was great. It's great to be at an age where you can have the ability to do that with, a child, or to do that just in your physical condition. It's a huge thing. I'm keying into what you're saying, just having that ability to do that, because there's nothing worse than thinking, I just can't do it. And I think there's kind of a mentality to a lot of people like 50 plus that just kind of say, yeah, I'm not healthy enough. I can't do it. I mean, is that something that you see a lot, that you feel is kind of a norm in the American society?
Totally. I think, another one of my big influences, and it's not from the world of fitness, but I think it has general application, is Carol Dweck and her book Mindset. And she talks about growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. And I think, a growth mindset essentially being one in which we believe that we are capable of, far more than we think we might be. And it's an issue of how much we invest in terms of our effort and our time and all of the rest. That will determine if we're successful. And we should always be careful not to label ourselves as, oh, I'm bad at pick your topic. I'm bad at running. I'm bad at math. I'm bad at languages, whatever it might be, because it places limits on us. And I think you're right. I think a lot of folks, when they get to their 40s and 50s, they just feel like, oh, well, I'm tired now. I don't have the energy that I used to have. I don't have the strength that I used to have. And I'm going to be a good sport about it because I'm not a complainer, but that's just life and I'm going to accept it. And I think if you approach life that way, your horizons can get progressively narrower, and your ability to really live your fullest life can become much more challenging. And I think it's important to be willing to push against that, and to have a growth mindset and to say, well, what actually can I do? And you need to be rational about it, of course, but I think even being rational about it, we can very much surprise ourselves if we really put in the effort.
So of everything that you've accomplished and evolved to at this point in your life, what are you ultimately the proudest of?
Well, for sure being a parent. I've got 4 kids who are amazing. And I think it's always important to keep things like fitness in proper perspective. It's not an end in itself. It shouldn't be the central focus of anybody's life, in my view. I think it's an incredibly important part of my life, but it needs to be balanced by family. It needs to be balanced by work. It needs to be balanced by relationships. I think all of it is important, and certainly I think children come first. So I would certainly put that number one. And then beyond it, for me, it's just been exciting to always be looking for new mountains to climb. It makes life a lot more fun.
So if you had a dream tonight and ran into the 18-year-old version of you, ready to charge into life, and you could give that version of you a piece of advice based on this life you've lived, the wisdom you've accumulated, what advice would you impart?
I love that question. I actually think about that stuff. I think, because I do think that, one thing I would want to tell 18-year-old me is, like, there's some cool stuff in store here. And because I think 18-year-old me, if you had asked 18-year-old me, what do you think you're going to be like at age 63? I think 18-year-old me would have said, well, you're going to be old, you're going to be slow, you're going to be heavy, you're going to be bald, which actually I am bald. And life's going to be kind of not so great. That was the time of the Beatles song, When I'm 64. So I think what I would tell 18-year-old me is take chances, that in life we regret most, not the things that we failed at, but the things we didn't try. So take chances, try new things, push yourself, surprise yourself, don't place limits on yourself in any sphere of your life, because there are amazing experiences that are to be had out there if you're willing to take chances.
Yeah, I love that quote. I think Mark Twain said something along those lines, which is great. So
yep.
Everyone has a perception of you, family, friends, clients, colleagues, everyone that gets your book, but ultimately, I think you are.
Wait, I'm so sorry. You cut out just for a brief second there, ultimately, and then I missed the...
Sorry. Yeah. No, I'll just start at the top. So at the end of the day, everyone has a perception of you, family, friends, clients, colleagues, everyone that gets your book, that gets into your story, but ultimately you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
It's a really good question. I think what I am today is not what I was before. I think in the last 15 years, my outlook on life and my image of myself has really changed. I think before that, I was a person who took very seriously responsibilities as a parent, as a husband, as somebody who was working hard to provide, to help provide for his family. And I didn't sort of look beyond those areas of my life. And now I think in the last 15 years, I've become somebody who really looks for challenge, who looks for adventure, who looks to surprise himself, and who, works hard not to place limits on himself. And I think for me professionally, I've really flowered in the last 15 years. I think fitness-wise, it's been an amazing ride for me. As a writer too, these have been good years for me. And I hope I've been able to do those things without, taking away from my role as a father for kids that are now grown, but of course still, there's a lot of responsibility there.
So, there's always these misperceptions globally, probably in America too with Israel. So I'm going to ask you this. What's the greatest thing about living in Tel Aviv, and what do you miss about America?
I think the greatest thing about living in Tel Aviv for me is it's a very young city, and I'm not a young person anymore, but I like being around young people. I like the vibe, and I'm not far from the beach, and I walk along the beach and see people, playing volleyball, not just in the traditional way, but playing volleyball just with their feet in some cases. I see all sorts of extraordinary gymnastics going on. There's a vibe here. They're living life, they're active, they're physical, and I think that's really, really exciting. And it's a meaningful time. I mean, obviously this has been a country at war, and I think during wartime, people tend to pull together, and look out for each other. There's a spirit of volunteering here, which I really have found very compelling. So I think that part has been great. I think in terms of, what I miss about the States, there's no country in the world like the U.S. The possibilities, the opportunities are there. It's a world that makes sense. Things are easy. There's so much convenience there. It's a comfortable life. It's a protected life. It's great. And I loved, obviously, my years living in the U.S., which was most of my life. But for me right now, this, being here in Israel makes sense. And it's something that I've really appreciated.
So if anybody wants to pick up the book, if anybody wants to reach out, anybody has any questions, how do they go about doing that?
For the book, best bet is to go to Amazon. The book's title, which you've mentioned a couple times, Racing Against Time. And then to reach out to me, probably the best bet is either LinkedIn or my author website, jeffreyweiss.author.com. And there's a contact form there, and would love to hear from people.
I love it. Jeffrey, this has been great, man. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time, your story, and best of luck with everything. It's a wonderful one, man.
Thank you so much, Joe. I really appreciate it. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks for tuning in to another famous interview with Joe Dimino, where we cover the world of art, literature, business, spirituality, music, and more from around the globe. Our esteemed theme music was composed and produced by the great E.E. Pointer of Kansas City's River Cow Orchestra. If you want to hear more interviews, visit the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino channel on YouTube. You can also find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thanks again for listening, and until next time.